All right, guys, welcome back to the Buck Fever podcast. Another episode with me and Jake. And tonight's topic isn't necessarily the most exciting. It will be a good story, but it's kind of more the darker side of hunting, the part that happens but really sucks, that isn't super fun to talk about. But I think that is important to talk about, and it's part of the story. So we're going to cover that tonight, and we're going to tell it start to finish. But basically, what happened was I shot a buck this weekend, and we couldn't find it. So that's the gist of it. But there's a lot of twists and turns and ins and outs to get into. And like I said, it is a good story, but obviously not the result that you want to have. Kind of a tough topic to talk about, but like I said, I think it's important to cover it. So Jake was obviously, part of the story in at least half of it. So we'll get him in here on his input. But anything you want to lead off with, buddy, or should I just kind of get into it?
I mean, mostly just that I give you a lot of credit for being able to talk about this and want to share your experience. Like you said, it is the darker side. And, a lot of times when this happens, people don't want to talk about it. They just want to kind of put it behind them and forget about it, which is, at a certain point, there's a time to do that. But, reflecting on it and seeing what could have went different or what we could have done or anything like that is always good. So, I'm just excited, and I'm glad you want to talk about it and share it with everybody.
Yeah, I think it's, obviously it happens. When something like this takes place and you tell people about it, that's pretty much the first thing everybody says is like, oh, I've been there before. That's happened to me. And so it's not like it's a unique thing. I think if it's never happened to you, you probably haven't really been hunting very long or very much or whatever,
Right.
I think most of the time, if you've been hunting long enough, something like this has happened to you before. So I think it's good to talk about it. And yeah, so I think we'll share the story here. We're also not going to release a video on it. So I guess that would be the other part of it. It would have made a really, really awesome video. Like really, really awesome, but it's not going to end up coming out. I think as far as a podcast topic goes, I think it's a great podcast topic. As far as a YouTube video goes, I think it's probably not the right thing to be putting out there in terms of, the messaging on it and whatever. I don't think you necessarily want to promote a video of shooting an animal that you end up not finding. Not that it was anything that we specifically did wrong or anything like that. Everything was above board, but just as far as a video goes, it's probably not the right one to be putting out. But I think the perfect way to tell that story is on a podcast like this. So I guess that's what we're going to do.
And it's almost hard to film a video like that,
Right. It's not the way anybody really wants it to go. So yeah. I hear you. But yeah, so let's get into it. Just happened this past weekend. And when I tell you that day was the perfect day, I mean it wholeheartedly. It was absolutely the perfect day. It was just, the weather was perfect. It was like 60 and sunny, and it was a Friday, so I had to work that day. But I knew I was going to be able to get out at just the right time to be able to get there and have a decent hunt that afternoon. So knowing that the timing was going to work out just perfectly, the weather was perfect. It was sunny. It wasn't a cloud in the sky that day. The wind was very, very mild. There was like a slight breeze, but really not much at all. It wasn't super breezy. It wasn't completely still. It was just perfect. Everything about it. And I remember telling 2 or 3 people that day that I was going to shoot a buck that night. I know I told at least one of my coworkers. I think I told Gabby. I don't know if I told you.
No, but I I remember the only thing I really remember before you calling me, it was that you snapped me, and it was like I don't even know what time it was, and I just remember saying, you better get out there. They're gonna start moving, and next time I heard from you was you're like, I'm here, and then I got the call. So I mean, I would agree with that. Beautiful night. It was. I mean, it was gorgeous. I wish I could have been out there.
It was the type of night that if you gave me the chance to pick like exactly every detail about the ideal day I would want to have to be hunting, I'd point to that day and say, just give me that. It was absolutely perfect. And so, yeah, to get back to it, I told a couple people, I was like, I'm going to shoot a buck tonight. I knew it. And we've talked about this before. I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast, but I swear to God, there's certain days, like when you shot Blade Runner, I was nervous that day. Like I knew somebody was going to shoot one that day. I knew it. And it's one of those things that like if nobody had shot one, or like Friday, if I hadn't shot a buck, we would just say, oh man, it really felt like something was going to happen. It was a great day. Like I really thought we were going to shoot one, which happens all the time. But I swear something was different about it. Sometimes it just is. Like when I got to the woods, I wasn't on my phone at all. I was like dialed in, locked in. Sometimes you get to that point where it's like, man, I gotta, like, you get a little bit bored up there and you just kind of have to pass the time a little bit. I had none of this. I was like locked in. I was nervous to the point where, and I don't really get super worked up about that type of stuff. That's kind of just how it goes. But I was legitimately like nervous in the sense that like I knew something was going to happen. I just knew it. So, believe me or not, take my word for it or don't. I swear to God, I knew it was going to happen. And after the fact, when I called my dad, he said he told like 7 or 8 people that day that I was going to shoot one that night. Really? So yeah, he must have been, people at work or, maybe whoever, but he had a great feeling about it too. He knew it was going to happen. And part of that is just the time of year. We're getting into that pre-rut now where bucks are naturally just moving and they're moving at daylight and they're kind of throwing caution to the wind a little bit. So it is that time of year where, it gets a little bit, dare I say, easier, and the number of sightings during daylight is going to increase. So it's not like it's the hardest thing to predict that the hunting's going to get better this time of year, but there was something about it that day. Everybody just kind of knew that something was going to happen. And so sure enough, I get there at a good time. And before I went out, I set my target out and shot a couple times at 25 yards. I knew the stand I was going to, and that stand has a licking branch, a mock scrape set up on it with our trail cameras pointed at, and the camera's been increased in activity over the past couple weeks. And so I knew based on the wind and everything that's where I wanted to be. It's a 25-yard shot to that mock scrape. So, I practiced a couple times and things were pretty good. I was shooting well. If anything, that night I was kind of shooting a little bit high, like, 2 inches high maybe. And that was going to be plenty good enough. So I figured, I'm going to aim for bottom of the lungs, top of the heart, and that's going to be it. If I shoot 2 inches high, it's going to just double lung them, and that's all she wrote. So, that was kind of my plan, and I got out there and got in at a good time. Didn't spook anything on the way in. Everything was great. I checked my wind. Perfect for that stand. And it probably only 20 minutes went by, and I heard 2 bucks rattling their antlers. They were going at it a little bit. and I could hear them kind of off in the distance. They were probably 80 yards, 100 yards away. I couldn't see them, but I could hear them. I could hear as they were rattling, going back and forth like that. They were kind of stomping through some water. So there's that little waterway that passes through kind of at the very bottom part of the property there that drains
Yep.
from the swamp to the pond. You would know what I'm talking about. Everybody at home probably doesn't, but it's just this, little drainage waterway coming out of a swamp. And I could hear them splashing around in there as they were going at it, which helped me to figure out about how far away they are. And that was within 20 minutes of sitting there. So I'm pumped up, and I grunt a couple times just to kind of try to pique their interest. Maybe think, oh, there's a third buck around. Let's go see what's going on over there. And they never did. I never got to look at these deer, but I was pretty laser focused over in that direction, understandably, because I know that there's, 2 bucks that are over there. There's probably a good chance that one of them is one that I would shoot because, all things considered, my standards are a little bit lower. So, thinking, I told myself this season, and I know we've talked about it before, that I'm shooting the first 2.5-year-old deer that walks by. That's just all there is to it. That was my game plan. So there was a good chance if 2 of them were going at it that one of them was probably a 2.5. Maybe both of them were. And so I never ended up seeing either of those deer unless it happened to be one of them I saw later. But I'm pretty laser focused in this direction, and maybe 10 minutes go by since I last hear them rattling, and a deer pops up literally right from that direction. But it only took me a couple seconds to identify it as a fawn. And then as I'm watching it, eventually I see another deer pop out, and it's a doe. And they kind of work their way in. They're browsing on whatever. They're not really super bothered, just kind of doing their thing. Eventually they work in pretty close. And then they kind of, head off in the other direction. And then, I don't know, maybe another 10 minutes goes by, and there's a spike buck that comes running through. And he's, fired up doing his thing. He's only a yearling. He's got no idea what's going on or why he feels the way he feels right now, but he's just fired up and rambunctious and doing his thing. So he's, running through there, and eventually he makes his way, and he comes up and works on that licking branch that I've got set up at 25 yards, and he's working on that for probably 2 minutes. Super cool to watch, and got great footage of him and everything, and reinforcing in my mind, like, okay, this is what I'm expecting to see here. When they come through this spot, they're gonna hit this licking branch 25 yards. This is when I can draw back. This is when I can move and get the camera situated. Kind of going through all these things in my mind, feeling pretty good about that. And eventually, he makes his way off, but pretty constantly over the next hour, I'm either seeing him or the does and fawns or both of them running around chasing. He was chasing them a couple times. At one point, they almost looked like my dog when you get him riled up and he's like running laps through the living room. They were like running laps around me, just like tearing around, because this little buck's chasing them and they don't know what's going on, and they're just tearing around, doing their thing. No idea I'm there, not a care in the world, just doing deer things, running all over the place. And then, so I'm seeing each of these deer a couple more times. And then maybe a half an hour goes by. And at this point, we're probably half hour till dark. Half hour goes by where I don't see anything. Everything's pretty quiet. At some point in here, I do a rattling sequence. Nothing comes about. But then after that half an hour of everything being pretty quiet, I see that spike buck pop out one more time. He gets kind of over in that scrape area again. I don't remember if he hit it again or if he was just kind of over there milling around. But then eventually he works his way like all the way behind me. And this stand is probably 15, 20 yards to a field edge of cut corn. So that's kind of the idea. You're blowing your wind over that cut corn field where, you really shouldn't have to worry about deer getting behind you too much, at least not in daylight hours. But sure enough, he goes right behind me. Never a care in the world. No indication that he's on to me, whether it's scent or movement or anything. He's got no idea. And he works off behind me. And like I said, at this point, it's probably a half hour till dark. Now, the cameras that we use are more cost effective than anything. They're on the cheaper side, mainly because we have so many people who film for us. As like these starter cameras, the goal was just to get them in the hands of as many people as we could. So to do that, you can't buy a $3,000 camera and get that for 8 people. We had to get some of the cheaper ones. So they're not the greatest, and we all know that once it starts getting into those low light conditions, they start getting pretty pixely and pretty crappy very, very fast. And I usually say they've got about 5 minutes where maybe it's 7 or 8, where the camera is basically worthless. It's not going to pick up anything. You're not going to see anything through that camera shot. But in those 7 or 8 minutes that the camera's not going to pick anything up, you can still shoot. It's still shooting light. Your eyes can still see just fine. So it's kind of like just that little time right before it gets dark.
Right.
Well, sure enough, that's when this buck shows up. And I first see him off to my right, and he's walking pretty much right at me, right at my tree. He doesn't know I'm here. I know at this point that the camera's probably not going to pick up much, but I'm still, getting it on him just in case. So he kind of is walking right up at me, not super quick, not super slow, just at a steady pace. He's just moving through. And he probably walks to within 10 yards of my tree and then starts heading north. And north is where that mock scrape is. So I'm like, all right, this is perfect. I know he's heading right there. And he's not a giant, but I can clearly see he's a 2.5-year-old deer. He just, not a basket rack, but he's an 8-pointer. He's not giant. He's a 2.5-year-old 8-pointer. We can all picture what that looks like in our minds. That was pretty much him. Textbook 2.5-year-old 8-pointer. And, for me, I've never shot a buck that big. So that's why going into this year, it was like, well, the first 2.5-year-old I see, I got to shoot him. I haven't shot a deer in 6 years. I've never shot a buck with my bow. Like, there's so many aspects of it where it's like, this just has to happen. We've just got to, get this over with. I can't be holding out for a 3.5-year-old 135-inch deer at this point. Like, I haven't shot enough deer to get that picky. I don't need to shoot a spike buck, but that 2.5-year-old deer, I got to get one of those under my belt. So at this point, I know this is a deer that I want to shoot. And he's working to my north, right up to this mock scrape. And like I said, he's going at a pretty steady pace. He gets up there and he's almost hitting another branch like a scrape. Not fully, but kind of. And so at this point, I've got the camera all lined up, everything's set, ready to go. Bow in hand, ready to draw back, and takes a couple more steps, and there he is on the scrape, and he's working it pretty good. He's got no idea I'm there. He's not alerted at all. He's just hitting the scrape. So I draw back, still, even with the sound of the arrow getting drawn back, nothing. He's got no idea. I double check the camera one more time, it's still on him. And the weird thing with those cameras is, on that screen, you can still see it really well. So whatever it is about the screen, it shows up great. But then you go and take that footage, put it on the computer, doesn't look as good in that low light. I don't know what the deal is, but it still looks good. I see him on the screen. Okay, we're ready to go. And so I take the shot and immediately felt good about it. Heard it hit. Saw the arrow go in. Looked like a really good shot to me. There was no doubt in my mind at this point. Everything looked great. You know, it's kind of that relief of taking that shot and then you see it hit and you're like, yes, you know, that's where I was aiming. That's a good shot. And at that point, it really, honest to God, I thought it was. He ran probably 15 yards before the arrow fully spat out the other side of him. But I could clearly tell at this point, you know, sometimes you see the arrow go in, maybe it's a shoulder shot. So it goes in, doesn't penetrate fully, and then spits back out the same side. But I'm shooting a lighted knock, so I could see the lighted knock bury into him. Doesn't pop out the other side. He runs 15 yards, and all of a sudden, I see it spit out the other side of him. So now I know I've got a full pass through. I know where my arrow's at, so I'll be able to climb down and go take a look at it and, you know, analyze for blood and whatever. He takes another couple steps past that arrow popping out, and he stops. And at this point, he's just standing there. And I remember I had the camera over to him at this point, and I'm whispering, you know, go down, go down. And he's kind of wavering, like his legs are wobbly at this point where it looks like he might, or he's going to go on a death run and crash, you know, 20 yards from here. But he's standing there for 30 seconds, legs wavering, tail flickering a little bit, tail's down, not flickering real fast, just a wag and then stop and then, you know, a couple seconds and a wag and whatever. And so at this point, I've got two thoughts. One is liver shot. Two would be heart shot. A deer that's shot in the lungs, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a deer that's shot double lung is just going to run like crazy, not going to walk, not going to stop, not doing any of that. It's going to run until it dies. A deer shot in no man's land or in the guts or whatever, also probably just going to run and run. You're not going to see him stop or walk off or anything like that. Does that kind of sound correct based on everything you know, Jake?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, the two that I've shot this year were pretty much both lung, and they looked like a bat out of hell flying through the woods. Like,
right.
You know, you pretty much hit spot on. Even no man's land, I mean, they tear out of there too. Yeah, if they're long hit, they're not walking 20 yards and then chilling, you know, so.
Right. So I've seen it with liver, this exact thing happen. And then my dad shot a buck 2 weeks prior and we recovered it. So upon, you know, examining the remains, it was a heart shot. We saw right where the broadhead had hit the heart. And his deer ran 10 yards and then did the same thing, stopped, bedded down right there. And it wasn't until, you know, half hour later we went and started to just look for the arrow. We weren't really trying to track him at this point, just go down, look for the arrow and look at that first blood. Well, he's only 10 yards away from the arrow. So we kick him up. I don't know how he's still alive at this point. Looking back on it, perfect, you know, heart shot. I don't know how he's still alive half hour later, but he was. And he got up at that point, ran 20 yards, and I was almost positive that I heard him crash. He was going down. He looked really sick. And sure enough, we went and found him right there. So when my deer reacted this way, those are my two thoughts. I've seen guys hit him in the liver, and they react like that. And my dad's reacted almost identically, and he shot him in the heart. And based on where I saw my arrow go in, that lined up perfectly. I knew there was nothing high about it. It wasn't like back in the guts, none of that. I knew that it was on the lower end of things and probably harder liver. Both should be a fatal shot. But he stands there for 20, 30 seconds, whispering, go down, go down. He doesn't. He ends up, flicker that tail and kind of walks off. And, it obviously it's getting darker by the minute. Here we're right at, last shooting light. And so he walks off, and I never hear him crash or anything like that. But in my head, what I'm thinking is, and there's thick brush in there. You can't see super far, especially from up in that tree. There's still a lot of leaves on and everything. So I'm thinking he's probably going to take a couple steps, bed down, and that's where we're going to find him dead. And so I give it some time. At this point, I haven't called anybody yet. I haven't turned the camera around to do any sort of post shot interview freak out. Haven't done any of that, because as soon as he walks off and I lose sight of him, another buck shows up, comes out, from my north, going towards that mock scrape. And this buck is bigger, gets to within 10 yards of my stand. I would have shot, if I hadn't seen the deer that I shot, I would have shot this one at 10 yards right there, So it was still enough shooting light that I'm shooting this one at 10 yards if I hadn't just shot a deer that I thought went down. And he works his way off in the same direction that my deer went, and I never heard him kick anything up or anything like that. So I'm thinking the deer I shot is probably down right over there. So now all this time passes, all these deer clear out. Now is when I do a little bit of an interview, and then I start calling people. So, time's passing. I call you, I call Gabby, I call my dad, I call whoever, and I'm kind of getting the word out. And at this point, I'm still feeling pretty good. And you and I kind of talked it over at that point. I don't remember too much of what we had said, but I think you and I kind of both, walking through it all, had a pretty good feeling about things.
Yeah, I was just ecstatic with excitement. I asked my sister, she was over when you called me, I was could not sit down, damn near running around the house. So excited. Right away I'm asking, can I come? Basically I should have just left right away. I should have just done it. But I'm oh, I want to come up there, I just want to be there, even if you guys, you go up there and whatever. I just want to be there for it. So, we talk about it, and then you send, you're oh, telling me you think you hit him good and whatnot, and you ended up sending me a picture of the blood or the arrow. I don't know when that was, 20 minutes later, if that.
Yeah, we had hung up, and then, I told you I'd give it a couple minutes, pack my things up, get down, and then check, and I was going to send you, whatever I found and just get your input on it. So, yeah, it was probably 20 minutes later.
Yeah, and after looking at that, the pictures and stuff, I would have said, lung, maybe clip a liver. It was a little dark, but it wasn't purple, dark, where it's what, that's not lung or whatever. So, I was feeling pretty confident too, just from seeing that, and obviously not seeing the shot or whatever, but, I was feeling quite confident that deer wasn't too far.
Yeah, and, I took a picture of the arrow, sent it to the group chat, and I remember Colby responding, pretty quickly, dude, that arrow looks really good. Congrats. What was it? Buck or a doe, whatever. And I don't think I responded at that point, but I saw him say, that arrow looks really good. And so I'm thinking, I agreed. It was covered in blood. It was a full pass through. Everything looked great. I didn't look at all past the arrow, just because of what happened with my dad's deer. I was if he is still alive, I don't want to go too far that direction. I wanted to see first blood, see the arrow, and that's it. So I got a picture of the first blood, picture of the arrow, backed out of there. Like you said, the blood was on the darker side of things, but not to the point where you're oh, that's purple blood. That's obviously liver. It wasn't nothing guts about it. It wasn't light pink where you think maybe you just hit the muscle. Right? It looked like a vitally shot deer would bleed.
Right.
So, and that's kind of maybe the most important part here is like, for you and Gabby, you guys wanted to come over there and see it. It's a long trip in the dark and everything. And, if I thought for a second that we weren't going to find that deer, I wouldn't have told you guys to come. You might not have listened to me. You still might have. But I would not, if I thought for a single second, if I had any doubt in my mind that deer, that we weren't going to find him, I would have told you guys that, and I would have told you not to come, because that's too much of a hike. I would not have wanted you guys to do that if I even thought at all that there was any remote possibility that we weren't going to find him. So at this point, I think everybody's thinking, like, this is a done deal. He's going to be down.
And either way, I was coming no matter what. I mean, once you told me that, I was, pretty much set on coming up there.
Yeah, that's kind of what I figured. But, at this point, you go and pick up Gabby, and you guys are starting to make your way. I backed out of there, left the arrow right where it was, left everything, just grabbed my stuff, headed out to that cut cornfield to try and not disturb any of the woods, backed out of there completely, got back to my car, drove back to the farm, and we waited till like 8 o'clock. So by this time, it's at least an hour and a half that, since I had made the shot. So we're thinking, based on everything, now I've shown my dad the pictures, my grandpa. Nobody's really got a doubt in their mind. Everybody's thinking, this thing's pretty good, and we're going to be able to go and find it. So we go back out around 8 and go to where First Blood is, track from First Blood to the arrow, and there's a few drops here and there. We don't see a ton between where I shot him and where the arrow popped out. But when you're thinking, well, the arrow was plugging up at least the exit hole, so that would kind of make sense. And, the arrow was only 15 yards maybe from where I shot him, so you figure a deer running full speed to go 15 yards, what is that, 3 steps? Right. In the first 3 steps where the wound hasn't opened up completely yet, it's probably not going to bleed a ton. So nothing really to be too alarmed about at this point. Find the arrow right where it was, lighted knock and everything, looks good. Start tracking beyond where the arrow popped out, and blood is still kind of hard to find at this point. A little bit here, a little bit there, not seeing much. Doesn't take too long. We get up to where he stood there for that 20, 30 seconds and, find a big pool of it. It's dripping out of him pretty good at this point. So we find that. I take a picture. Obviously, it still is looking a little bit dark. Nothing that I'm concerned about. Looks like a lot of blood. Looks like good blood. And where he stood there, he kind of had to take some. Once he finally did take a step, I couldn't quite remember. There was like a tree right in front of him. I couldn't quite remember if he went left or right off this tree. So we start looking for blood left, start looking right, and we're struggling to find another drop. And after a while of searching, I finally did find literally one more drop to the left of that tree. So I knew he broke that direction, which is kind of what I had thought, in the back of my mind. I was thinking that's the way he went. But obviously I was hoping there'd be a blood trail to follow and tell me, but I found one more drop past where he stood, and that was the last blood that we found throughout the whole search process. That was it. So when the blood dried up like that and we couldn't really find any, it gets to a certain point, where everybody's pretty quiet, not exactly sure what to say or what to think. Kind of a shock considering what we had thought. And still at this point, everybody's probably thinking, all right, well, it was probably still a good shot, but maybe it just didn't open up that much of a wound. Maybe he's dead 15 yards away, and he just bled out, and that was it. Um, so kind of going off of that, and everybody starts to branch off a little bit, look for more blood. Um, and then it turns into basically an all out grid search, and we're looking all up and down, thinking, well, maybe he went to water. Okay, well, there's a pond, there's a river. We search, in all directions towards water. No blood, no sign of him, no nothing. Maybe he circled back around to where he came from. So we kind of circle back, head back behind, where he came from. Nothing. Head out into the cornfield, search out through there, flash the light. Nothing. Looking all over the place, can't find anything. And, the couple hours go by, and you and Gabby roll up. So, I go out and meet you guys at the driveway, and we drive back in to continue the search, and I kind of run you guys through it. Obviously, at this point, I expected to find them and have them, pretty much gutted and almost maybe back to the farm by the time you guys got there. And at this point, spirits are kind of low. You're still pretty optimistic, thinking, maybe he is liver hit, but he's probably going to be down somewhere along the river or something, thinking, let's just not push it too much tonight. Let's, give it a chance, give it till morning, let him bleed out, and we'll just go find him in the morning. So I think, what time was it? 10:30 when we quit looking?
Yeah, probably. I mean, yeah, I would agree with that. I was pretty confident. He was liver hit, and that, I said probably 100 times that I bet you we'll find him by the river tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
I've experienced that with maybe not even liver, but gut hit deer, or just any wounded deer likes to go to water.
Yeah.
And I knew there was a river by you guys that you haven't checked yet, so I was like, well, let's not push it. First of all, I mean, grid searching at night is 10 times harder than grid searching during the day.
Yeah.
So I know it probably sounded like I was pushing a lot, but I was pretty much pushing to back out of there for the most part.
Yeah, and I think everybody was ready to. Nobody really wanted to, because I think once you back out and you not give up, but like you have that understanding of like, okay, we're not gonna find him tonight. I think that really does something to everybody mentally, where you realize that the chances are kind of dropping here at this point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm kind of, I'm not super thrilled about the situation. And I think it was harder because I thought the shot was so good, and I thought the blood looked so good, and everything was telling me that it was going to be good. And then, to go down and really not find much for blood afterwards, and not find any sign of them or anything, in grid search as far as we did, and not find any sign of them. It was just such a gut punch, because, like I said, it was the perfect day, perfect situation, perfect, what I thought was the perfect shot. He read the script. Everything was perfect, and I thought it was. And then to have that realization that it wasn't was really a tough pill to swallow. But, at this point, we go back and we watch the footage through, and like we said, it's kind of tough to tell. It's, cameras aren't that great in low light, but you can see the lighted knock, obviously, plain as day, and you can still see the deer, for sure, the outline of them. So we look at it, and we know at that point, like, nothing high about it. Wasn't too far forward, didn't hit the shoulder, maybe a little bit towards back, but we knew based on the arrow and the blood and everything, it wasn't anything guts about it. So, like, if this missed anywhere, it missed low. And we knew that, from looking at it. So we watch the footage and get as much information as we can, go to bed and just say, 8 o'clock in the morning, whatever. It'll have been 14 hours, give or take, by the time we get out there, and we'll go looking for him. And even if he's liver hit, he should be down maybe along the river or whatever. So at this point, I'm kind of like, not necessarily optimistic, but it was like you can see so much further in the day and so much better, like you said. So I'm kind of thinking like, man, every minute that passes, the chances just drop. They just plummet so quick every minute that passes because you can cover so much ground so quickly. It's like we're pretty much going to know within 15, 20 minutes of looking if we're going to find this thing or not. And so obviously it didn't take very long. We searched those places down by the river, lap around the pond again, looking at, some of the thick areas you could have bedded down in that we wouldn't have been able to see very easy at night. Obviously, you can see the whole field now without the spotlight and no sign of them. Not another speck of blood. Not a track that looked like a deer that went on a death run. Didn't find it where he bedded down for the night and, was maybe bleeding. Nothing. Didn't find any sign of him. So, that was a pretty tough pill to swallow there at that point for everybody, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely wasn't what I thought we would walk into, to be honest. But I guess, after him bleeding for 20 yards and then, absolutely nothing after that, I guess it was kind of something I guess I should have thought of more, But, like I said, I was expecting to find him dead, not
Right.
too far from there, so.
Right. And yeah, and we didn't. And I think obviously when that happens there's so many emotions to process, right? And it kind of goes without saying, but I think we should anyways, like you never want to wound an animal. That's obviously never the intention. That's the last thing you want to happen. I would have felt 100,000 times better if I just had a clean miss. A clean miss would have been perfect. I could have been kicking myself. I could have been pissed off all night that I missed one. But I would have been able to get down, realize pretty quickly from a lack of blood on the arrow and lack of blood anywhere that I missed them. You and Gabby wouldn't have made the trip. And, I wouldn't have wounded an animal. We wouldn't have spent all that time searching. Wouldn't have stunk up the property, and we would have kept hunting for the weekend. I probably would have been pretty upset, but not nearly as upset as I was after all this stuff had transpired. So, first and foremost, you never want to wound an animal like that. But, then I just felt terrible that you guys had made that trip, and I should have, thinking like, man, I should have just tracked and tried to find a little bit more blood, and maybe I would have realized there wasn't going to be much, and it would have saved you guys from making the trip. And I just felt bad about that, and I think that was it,
buddy, because we were coming either way, and I'd do it twice on Sunday.
I know. I think that when I finally, was thinking about it all weekend and got back out there, because we did hunt the rest of the weekend, and it wasn't totally ruined. We still had some action, but I think as I was sitting in the tree stand and kind of processing how I felt and everything, that was the number one thing was like, I've got just it's been a struggle the past couple of years of not necessarily seeing much, or if you do see them, not getting a chance to shoot them, whatever. It's been a long time. And I've just had such a great group of people around me that have really been rooting for me, really pulling for me to shoot one of these days. Just a lot of people in my corner, which I'm super lucky to have and super thankful to have, and everything. And I think that that was the overwhelming feeling that I felt at that point after we didn't find him, was that all of those people that were rooting for me, I had just let them all down, and I think that's what felt the worst out of everything, was like, all these people who were going to be so pumped for me to finally have shot one. And then, this deer walks by and I totally blow it. And, to let all those people down, then I'm thinking like, well, I didn't even deserve I waited all this time. It's been how many years since I last shot one, and I didn't even deserve to have this one walk by because I ended up blowing it anyways. And I think that part was what sucked the most after all of that. So it
Well, buddy, let me tell you, you didn't let anybody down. First of all, I mean, it's hunting. Stuff like that happens. I mean, more than a lot of people think. I think, to be honest with you. So, I mean, there's nothing to be ashamed of or anything like that. And we're still going to be there and stand behind everything. We all got the same common goal, and if anybody deserves it, it's you. You put in a ton of time, and your land's not close. You're making the trip, and hunting, even if the movement's slow or you're not seeing a ton. I mean, I give you credit. You go out there and do all that stuff, and where you're not seeing a ton of deer all the time, but you still go out there.
yeah, we've certainly put in a lot of effort, and um, just my dad shooting one this year off that property, like that already sealed the deal. Like that was already good enough for everybody. We could not see another deer the rest of the year, and that was already going to be the best season we've had in maybe a decade. I don't know. Like that already was everything we needed. But then to have that opportunity for us to both shoot one, to shoot two bucks in 1 year like that would have been just like completely unbelievable. And the season's not over. I mean that can all still happen. So it's not like everything's a total lost cause or anything. But yeah, just a lot of tough pills to swallow with all that. But by the end of the weekend, I had thought about it enough and hunted enough to where I think I was able to get myself in a better place mentally. Going forward here, realizing there's still some time yet this year, including this weekend, and our trail cameras have never been hotter. Things are really ramping up. We're seeing tons of action out there, all kinds of new bucks, big bucks, all kinds of different stands, seeing them in daylight, just seeing all kinds of good stuff out there. So I think this weekend is probably going to be some of the best hunting of the season. And then obviously after that, we're going to Minnesota for their gun season. And then you come back, there's another weekend or two of Wisconsin archery before Wisconsin gun season. So we're just in the heart of the season here. We've got a lot of good hunting yet to go. It's certainly far from over. We've got our chances here to redeem ourselves. But at least for that weekend, it was a tough pill to swallow.
And you did everything you could have, and I give you credit for even hunting the next morning and night, and and this might go without saying, but we tried our hardest. If that deer is dead, we would have found them. You guys looked for almost 2.5 hours on Friday night, and then next morning we looked for another 2.5, 3 hours. So it's not like didn't find any blood, we're out of there.
Right.
He's alive. We scoured everywhere, and we tried.
Yeah, we looked and looked and looked until it was pretty clear that we were never going to find them, and then we kept looking after that. We made sure to dot all our I's and cross all our T's, and just find anything we could, and we just couldn't. So I think that was the other thing that helped is everybody sort of agreed that there's a good chance he probably didn't die. He's probably out there doing his thing, and as much as you never want to wound a deer like that, they are so tough. I mean, it's not that there's any excuse for it or anything, but they're super tough, man. I think that deer is probably out there just doing his thing.
I'd agree. I mean, like I said, if he was dead, I'm almost 99% sure we would have found him. So,
yeah, I agree.
But there's nothing else you can do besides get back on the horse. So,
right, yeah. I mean, if you just quit for the year after something like that, then you're still not gonna shoot one from the couch. So just got to get your head on straight and kind of regroup. And I haven't really lost much confidence in my shot or anything. I mean, I pretty much hit right about where I was aiming. I I have a hard time telling myself that it was a bad shot because I just don't necessarily think it was. I think I hit pretty much where I was aiming. If anything, I needed to aim a little bit higher, but I don't look back and lose confidence really on much. I think that sometimes that just happens and it wasn't going to be perfect. And, we just have to get back out there and try again.
Right. I mean, you did everything you can, and there's not much else you can do besides with the way we had it. I suppose is I'm trying to say is that you tried, and it's like you said, it's a tough, very tough pill to swallow, and doesn't make you sleep any better at night. And I mean, really, until you see a sign or whatever. But getting back out there was definitely a game changer. I think that if you wouldn't have got back out there, it would have been a lot different of a, go home and mope about it and whatnot, which is, there's time to reflect on it, but, getting back out there is just a great way to almost let your mind not think about it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I went and sat right back out in that same stand for the rest of the weekend. So I definitely had to think about it a little bit more, but I think all of that just helped kind of going it over all in my head. And, I think you have to let yourself think about it and feel what you're feeling and figure out why you're feeling what you are so that, you can get over it and make yourself feel better. And, the one thing that I guess if I could try to pass on this, I don't know if you could call it wisdom, but thoughts that I had, I thought about that. Let's say it was the exact same scenario, exact same situation, but it was my dad who took the shot. I wouldn't be upset with him. I wouldn't be mad at him. I wouldn't have anything negative to say. I would have wanted him to take that shot 10 times out of 10. I would have been right there helping him track it 10 times out of 10. If anybody else had taken that shot, I wouldn't have any negative emotions towards that person. So just because I'm the one who took that shot, why should I have all these negative emotions towards myself? I have to be able to think about myself as if I was, somebody else almost, and kind of remove myself from that situation, because that's what helped me to really get over it the most. I think was like, nobody else is mad at me. Jake's not mad at me. My dad's not mad at me. Gabby's not mad at me. My grandpa's not mad at me. Nobody's mad at me for anything, so why am I mad at me? I don't need to be. That's not helping anything. And if it was anybody else, I wouldn't be mad at them. So, I think that was the mindset that I needed to have. So if there's anything to pass along to anybody who's still listening at this point, if you find yourself in a situation like that, certainly it's not easy, but do the best you can to kind of get yourself in a mind frame similar to that one. Like, man, nobody else is mad at you for this. At a certain point, you got to forgive yourself and don't be mad anymore, because nobody else is.
Right, exactly.
So, yeah, that was pretty much that, man. That was last weekend. It was some action. Wasn't great at all. Wasn't the way you want it to go, but that's the weekend we had, and we're here to move on to the next one now. So, yeah, that was the story, but the story of this season is far from over. We've got still a lot of hunting to do. So, anything else? Any other wisdom you want to add here, buddy, before we wrap things up?
Nothing. I mean, get back on the horse, just like you've been doing.
Yeah, I think that's all you can do.
Nothing else you can do besides hunt.
Right. Yeah. If you quit, then what good is that going to do either? You gotta just gotta just get back out there, try again. So like I said,
I
that's what we're
couldn't
gonna
agree
do.
more.
Yeah, yep, and that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna get out there over the next couple weekends, and everybody's gonna be hunting. There's gonna be a lot of stuff coming. I'm getting excited for it, almost like I was at the beginning of the year. You know, this is the best hunting of the year is over these next couple weeks, and there's so much variety between Wisconsin archery and then Minnesota gun and Wisconsin gun. A lot of good hunting coming up. I'm excited for it. Excited to hear the stories, and I know that between everybody here at Buck Fever, there's definitely going to be some more success stories here to come. So I'm looking
I
forward to it.
agree. Me too.
All right. Well, yeah, that. Appreciate you guys tuning in, especially on a not so fun topic this week, but hopefully next week we've got a little bit better news to share with you. You never know. So thank you guys once again for listening. Make sure you're subscribed to our YouTube channel. We did have some success already this year, if you didn't know that. So there are some pretty cool videos out there of some bucks hitting the ground. You definitely want to check those out. And there's going to be some more to come. I know it. So once again, thank you guys. We appreciate it. And we will see you guys next time.